20 or 30 years, Denver has been transformed, and the rate of demolition is alarming when you think about the historic buildings that have been raised in the name of development. And with those buildings and with the shifts of population that have occurred because of gentrification, we're losing entire neighborhoods that have been critical to not only the history of Denver itself, but the Chicano or Latino community.
Beautiful buildings that they tear down to build these boxes, because I don't know if I want to call them houses, you know. And I know wonderful people live there, but our essence, lo antiguo de las casas, from the, you know, the beautiful homes.
Like the way the north side looks, and Rhino, and 5 Points. It's so boring, and there's just there's no life there. You know, I mean, it's just stale. You know, just leave the damn community the way it is, you know.
You know, the Auraria campus eliminated a very large Latino population. Most people in Denver today have no knowledge of that. You go on that campus and there's the old San Cayetano church, what we call St. Cajetan's church. So there was a deep Latino culture there.
For a population like the Latino community, whose stories were not always told in traditional narratives in books and articles and so forth, when you lose that physical landscape and you don't talk to people about those places, you lose that history. So this historic context project is part of a larger series of projects undertaken by the city of Denver to create an understanding of a fuller history of the city itself. So looking at in detail those communities that have been historically marginalized and whose stories and whose physical buildings of importance have been demolished. The information that comes out of this context report will be used to inform preservation efforts. And for a community like the Latino community, whose stories had not often been recorded in more traditional narrative ways, this is essential.
So we have to understand our history and what has happened. And once we understand that, then we can understand how to make it richer. So you can't start with a clean slate. You've got to go back and get the history.
The Latino people, who in this region often referred to as Hispanics or Mexican Americans in many cases, Chicanos, are really a mix of people, or a mestizo race, combination of the Spanish who came in the 1500s with the various indigenous groups all the way from South America to what would become the American Southwest. As the Spanish moved north, there were settlements, mestizo settlements, in places like New Mexico and southern Colorado as early as the 1600s. And then the first documented settlements in what is now Colorado were dated back to about the 1840s. The first incorporated town in what would become Colorado Territory in Colorado, the state of Colorado, is the town of San Luis, which was incorporated in 1851.
Officially, Denver gets started, founded November 22nd, 1858. But there were earlier Denvers that get forgotten and left out. There's the Indian camp that was here. The Southern Arapaho camped at the confluence of Cherry Creek and South Platte. It was their favorite winter camping space. Then they'd go out on the plains in the summer and then up into the mountains in late fall, but always come back to the confluence here. But there was also, and this is much less well known, there's no marker, there's hardly any mention of it, there was a place called Mexican Diggings. And it's mentioned only once in Jerome Smiley's definitive 1901 History of Denver. And he even has a map of it showing it was where Florida goes over the South Platte today. And no other mention of it after this. And I'm just guessing that what happened in California happened here. If gringos ever came across a gold or silver strike with Spanish-speaking people, they ran them off and, of course, didn't keep the name that the Spanish gave it. But it'd be nice to see at least some kind of a sign or a member there that there were Hispanics who discovered the gold and started camping here first.
After that, there would be waves of migration. So with the arrival of the railroad and other mining areas just outside the Denver area, there would be a wave of migration in the 1880s. But the large-scale migration, really from Mexico to Colorado, and then from rural areas into the Denver area, would take place during World War I. And with the Mexican Revolution, many families left Mexico to escape the chaos of that area, and others came for jobs. So whether it be the railroad industry, service industries, mining industries, and all of the offshoots of the mining industry, they started to settle in Denver.
The bottoms were the bottomlands along the South Platte River here in Denver, which were undesirable. They were in the floodplain, so no respectable folks would build down there, but the poor folks did, poor Italians did, and poor Hispanics did. And there at least they had water, they had good soil, so many of them became truck farmers.
And then after that, the next large-scale migration would come with World War II. We have about 15 million people migrating during World War II. And much of that was from rural to urban areas. And so we see, towns and villages in southern Colorado and eastern Colorado, western Colorado, emptying out really, and people coming to Denver for mostly the World War II industry jobs. So in 1942, President Roosevelt signed an agreement with the Mexican president at the time in what was called the Bracero program, which was a guest worker program. And because so many of our young men were fighting the war overseas, and a lot of our young workforce were in industries like factories to support the war, there was a real need for people to work the agricultural jobs. And so the Bracero program sought to fill those needs. And so you have people, kind of engaging in circular migration patterns to follow the crops, really, whether they be potatoes in the San Luis Valley to Weld County and the sugar beet industry, or various vegetable crops as well.
Hispanics didn't just show up here. They were recruited. The Great Western Sugar Beet Country, and many other factories, they wanted cheap, reliable, strong, docile workers would go south of the border and bring in people. So it wasn't like they moved in here. It was they were invited, they were brought in. And then often when the sugar beet season is over, they were just turned loose without any payment or any housing. So at that point they moved into cities like Greeley and Denver and Fort Collins and whatnot. But I think it's important to remember that these folks were brought here. It wasn't their idea.
The 1960s would see another large wave of immigration with the signing of the 1965 Immigration Act, which opened up immigration for Latin America and for Asia. I mean, you could easily argue that the economy of Denver, the city was built on the labor that Latinos provided. They were a cheap labor force. They were a very exploitable labor force, although there would be some organizing in heavily Latino and heavily immigrant industries that would fight back against that. But for the most part, their labor was absolutely critical to the building of the city. In addition to their labor, Latinos, Mexican Americans have shaped the culture of this city in some really important ways, some really critical ways. With their presence, physically, they changed the demographics of the city, and with that, they created business districts, places like Larimer Street or Santa Fe Drive, that were colored with Latino culture, Mexican American culture, and goods and practices. If you look at the residential history and old residential maps of the city of Denver, and I'm thinking specifically there's a 1938 map that shows the redlining in the city, the history of housing segregation, and you can look at what areas of the city Mexicans were allowed to live in. They were relegated through policies that were enforced through the real estate industry and the banking industry to certain parts of the city. And it is in those parts of the city that served like a home base. So even though you have Latinos kind of spread throughout the city by way of their labor and where they were needed, they would go back to their home base, their home neighborhoods. They would shop there, they would eat there, they would socialize there. And it was really in those areas when we start to see kind of a flourishing of the Latino community. So historically, Latinos have settled in particular parts of the city. One of the earliest settlements is right around where Auraria campus is today, the Auraria settlement. And then you also have another more central settlement along Larimer Street and we often mark these by parishes. So St. Cajetan's on the Auraria campus, and then Sacred Heart on Larimer Street. So very Mexican area, culturally, spiritually, and socially and economically. And then other areas of the city have been Northwest Denver, including part of the Globeville as well. Again, those what were considered less desirable neighborhoods. And then also in Southwest Denver, what is now, Westwoods, and then Sun Valley as well. Santa Fe Drive is a really good example of a Mexican-American neighborhood that had such significance to the community at large. So Santa Fe Drive itself would be the main business district, but it was the entire neighborhood that surrounded that, from St. Joseph's Parish to West High School, to the residential areas outside, and then the community organizations that would pop up through the neighborhood and serve the needs of that community in particular. But there's a lot of really storied history of Santa Fe Drive, from the barber shop that existed there to the UFW, the United Farm Workers, would have an organizing office on Santa Fe Drive. The West Side, Santa Fe Drive, and all of the areas, La Alma and Auraria, which it fed, which it served, was a critical part of the city, and certainly a home base for many Mexican Americans at the time.
When I first came to Denver, there was a great restaurant on Santa Fe Drive. We used to go that was my first exposure to the Mexican hamburger. I'd never heard of a Mexican hamburger. In South Texas, there are no Mexican hamburgers. They're just hamburguesas. And we used to go there to have Mexican hamburgers and have great green chili, or Chubby's restaurants in North Denver.
When we talk about the North Side, we're talking about an entire community, from everything from businesses to parishes to parks that provided gathering centers for the community, to places that were significant in youth culture as well. So the cruising that happened along 38th Avenue was an expression of Mexican-American culture, Mexican-American youth culture. North High School, again, a traditionally Mexican-American high school that in many ways is a window into that larger history. We also have the businesses on Tennyson, La Casita being one of them, but not the only one, that catered to Mexican-American clients and served the culinary and cultural needs of that community.
Well, right now we are in front of my building, 3311 Tejon, and this is what Rosalinda used to be. I bought the building in October 1984, and I opened in January 17, 1985, and we had Mexican food. One of the things that I love about that neighborhood, and I still do, we have Polish families, Italian families, Mexicanos, Chicanos. We were like a bouquet, un florero, de diferentes colores, idiomas, y podíamos caminar en la calle. No teníamos problemas. We didn't have no problems. We walked on the street, we knew each other, we knew everybody. Patsy, beautiful restaurant, Lechugas, and then al restaurant de Mi Casita, Casa de Tamales, and Páscuaro, Panaderia Rosales. It was a family neighborhood. And that's what I love. Era un sueño. Yo quería un restaurant. I wanted to open up a restaurant. And what better place than the north side? Nobody believed that I could get a place. Number one, my husband was the only one working. I had 4 children. And they said, you're not going to make it. I said, that's okay. That's what you think, and it's okay. But I know what I want to do. I wanted to have a small restaurant, and just feed my family, my neighbors, the teachers. My goal was to bring the community into the restaurant. We had so much wonderful places in our neighborhood, and we were just a big family. We had a Cinco de Mayo and the 32nd Avenue. We had mariachis, and we all got together. That was when we got, and then we had the teatro holiday. The movies, the Mexican movies, we all got, that was a gathering place too, for Sunday. Aquí estamos. When I decided to open up for Thanksgiving, because I was so grateful, so many people volunteered. And people says, why did you do that? I said, because I made a promise. If I get this building and I open my restaurant, I will feed the needy. I will feed the senior citizens. And then one year, I said, anybody and everybody who wants to come and be part of this, they're welcome. We don't have Thanksgiving dinners in Mexico. People say, but turkey, pavo, green chile, arroz y frijoles. Digo, sí, claro que sí. Es mi comida, es lo que sé hacer y es lo que me gustaría dar. And I mean, I don't know how many people we fed, but I know we fed thousands. Always knew that if I could do it, if I could open the door, I could do it. I could bring the people together. I could bring the neighborhood together. It was a wonderful year. All these years that we were here at the restaurant, it was wonderful. When we decided to close, 2015, my husband and I, we were just getting a little bit tired, and but it was set to go or to leave. But I'm still here in the neighborhood.
So on Larimer Street, we've heard many stories about Johnny's Market, which was a market that sold ingredients to make traditional Mexican-American dishes. So whether it be tamales or masa or pork or beef, Johnny's Market had it all. So it was also a place that provided a welcoming atmosphere for a Mexican-American population that wasn't always welcome or didn't find what they needed in other grocery stores throughout the city. When we talk about these neighborhoods, we have to, even though we think of them as separate, there are common themes that they all have. And I mean, they all had restaurants that catered to the Mexican-American clientele. They all had nightclubs. They had radio stations that played Spanish music. They had theater groups that, well, more recent days on Santa Fe Drive, we have Su Teatro headquartered there. These neighborhoods also had their own schools that had their own character. Each school in the district would have its own storied history and places of activism. And then, of course, the parish. The parishes anchored those neighborhoods in some really important ways. So the Latino population in Denver was, by and large, a Catholic population. And so parishes and all of the activities that a parish offered provided so many different services to the population. I would say the 3 main parishes that were really active politically and culturally and socially were St. Cajetan's in downtown Denver, and then it was relocated to Alameda. St. Anthony's in southwest Denver, and Our Lady of Guadalupe in northwest Denver.
When it comes to the Latino community, that Our Lady of Guadalupe was the hub of activism in the community, the hub of political activism in the community. The Guadalupe was unique in that regard. The community came together in a safe environment where we could debate ideas. It was a combination of Mexican Americans, so Native people, recent immigrants from Mexico or first-generation immigrants, and then also a combination of people that have lived in Colorado for generations. You know, that so it was a mix, and I think that's what was somewhat unique about Guadalupe Parish is it did have that mix of the recent immigrant population combined with the strong Chicano element. I was eventually recruited to join the parish council. It was my first parish council meeting. The pastor walked in. He said, you know, there's many pressing needs in this community, but probably the most pressing need that we have is for this, not just for the parishioners of Our Lady Guadalupe Church, but for the surrounding community, is access to health care. And he said, you know, the church owns this little 750 square foot bungalow across the street that was literally falling down. And he said, you know, wouldn't it be great if we could convert that into a clinic where people could come and get their health care and their mental health needs met. So I volunteered to lead the effort to open the clinic. A few weeks after that, I got up in front of at Sunday services, which were always packed, and said, you know, we don't have any money to hire a contractor, so if this is going to happen, it's going to have to be because of all of you. Had no idea who, you know, if there's going to be 2 people or 20 people that would show up. We had over 100 people showed up, and just really rebuilding it into a healthcare clinic, and opened the clinic to the community in the first part of 1995. Tepeyac Community Health Center is a community health center that provides a full spectrum of medical, behavioral health, and dental services. We also provide referral services to our patients who need care beyond what we're able to offer. Opened its doors at the corner of 36 and Calumet. From there, we moved to the Gloveville neighborhood at 51st and Lincoln, where our current clinic is located, and we will be opening up our new clinic later on in 2022 at the cross streets of Vine and 48th. I had no background whatsoever in healthcare that would lead me to believe that I had any business at all opening up a health clinic, but I think, you know, our community deserved to have access to quality health care and quality education and economic opportunity.
Much like the Black community, the history of the Black church, these parishes provided a place of political organizing.
When I moved to Denver, I joined Guadalupe Church because it was one of the Latino churches that had real understanding of the Latino culture, and the priests there were fighters for the Latino culture.
The history of Latino politicians in Colorado is an interesting one because we did have representation in the earliest years of statehood and territorial history.
Early on, there was a representative from southern Colorado, Casimiro Varela, I think from Trinidad, if I remember correctly, and he helped make sure that the Colorado Constitution was written in Spanish as well as English.
And that there would be a retraction, okay, as more Anglo-Americans moved into the area, and we start to see a displacement and a loss of that influence, that political influence. And it wouldn't be really until the 20th century, really until the Chicano Movement, that we would gain influence again. And so we start to see Mexican Americans being appointed to certain positions in the 1980s. So when we say the Chicano Movement, we're really talking about a burst of political activity that has its roots in the early 20th century. But really with the Chicano Movement in Denver, you know, it was the Crusade for Justice under Corky Gonzalez, but it was also a series of other movements throughout the city. It was against police brutality. It was a movement to gain more economic and employment justice and opportunity for the Chicano community. The Chicano movement would also be a renaissance or a rebirth of Chicano identity. So it was a community that was coming to grips and recognizing with pride its indigenous roots as well. We see the arts flourishing as well. Everything from teatro to visual arts to the murals throughout the city, which really provide us with sort of a documentation of our history through symbols, through time. Those murals tell stories. And for a community who often had more traditional avenues for telling their history, the street art was a way to tell those stories and to educate youth.
So this mural behind us, it's about, so there's the two Quetzalcoatl's behind us, and they believe that there's different worlds, right? Like every world has come and gone, and we're in the fifth world. But Quetzalcoatl passes to Quetzalcoatl, so that's what that is. They're one person, and they did it through fire. So they had a main fire that they would keep going, but then they would start a new fire every 52 years, or every world, right? Like, so this Quetzalcoatl is passing that fire to the next one. My name is Santiago Jaramillo. I'm a third-generation Westwood resident and the co-founder, executive director of D3 Arts, an organization here in Westwood. So D3 Arts came about 12 years ago. We had always been doing art around here. Then we met with Ann Lane, found out that they had the idea of doing something here, and the idea of making it an art district came about. So we all just started saying, okay, let's make it happen. And so we just started doing showings, you know, and people thought we were crazy because through the transformation of Westwood, as a teenager, it got crazy here. Like the neighborhood changed dramatically. Like violence was crazy here, you know, like I got shot at. It was crazy. It was a summer of violence. So people thought, why are you going to put art in Westwood? And I was like, because that's where I'm from. I think it'll help the neighborhood. And there's a lot of artists here, a lot of really good artists. We really wanted to bring it to the community and to youth because it helped change my life. You know, it gives me a purpose. Part of my story is I got involved with drugs and alcohol pretty early. I think I drank most of my life. Like the first time I got high, I was 6. Been sober now for 15 years, completely drug and alcohol free, sober. Westwood reminds me of my grandparents, but more importantly, my grandfather. And I have a 57 Chevy Bel Air that he gave me, and we would drive to the car wash and wash it, you know, like drive down Morrison. And so it just reminds me of my grandfather. My heart is here. That's kind of what this represents, is that we're bringing art here to Westwood. We've lit the fire, the inspiration. Art can be a platform to tell these stories, to tell people, especially the community, and then you can explain to them. And then kind of like say, and this is what you are. You know, at least to Mexicano people, Mexican American people, yeah, this is who you are.
So when we talk about Morrison Road, we really see the importance of a project like this Latino historic context, whereas other areas of the city, maybe it's too late. With Morrison Road, we still see what we can see as a repository of Mexican American culture.
In this area in Westwood, there's always been Mexicanos because it was cheap, and then there was farms here. So who does all the farming? Who does the work? You know, and it was something that when my grandfather and my grandmother came here, it was something they could afford. And so all the neighbors, it was the same, you know, it was just working class people.
Morrison Road is like one of the last chances that we have as a city to really preserve the original character of a Mexican-American business district, where Mexican-American people have been welcomed for generations. While gentrification is knocking on the door, this is an opportunity to really acknowledge those stories and to preserve those buildings.
My hope for Westwood in the future is that definitely more art related businesses are here, but my hope is that it just stays for the most part the way it is.
So this project and the stories that it has generated is important for everyone. Everyone who's interested in Denver, or who lives in Denver, or who wants to work in Denver. Because if we don't know the history of the place in which we're all living, working, eating, interacting with one another, there's just an emptiness.
We're getting a new and a more accurate history. It wasn't all rich white folks that did it.
But let's make Denver unique. Let's make it special. So when people come here, they'll say, oh, I'm going to Denver because they have a historic district.
We're not going to leave it. We're not going to let it just disappear. We still need to stay together. We still need to work together. And we need to tell everybody, we're still here. Los Chicanos, los Mexicanos, los Latinos, todos, everybody's here.
What are you so happy about?
Just look at Natasha.